In the year 1889, a single Pennsylvania valley burns brighter than almost any place in industrial America. Johnstown rises where two mountain rivers meet, and its furnaces run day and night without ever going cold. The rails that are stitching the American continent together are born here, in fire and smoke, in one of the largest steel operations anywhere on Earth. 30,000 people live along the valley floor, drawn from Germany and Wales and Ireland and Hungary by work that never stops, and the town they have built hums with the confidence of a place that knows exactly what it is worth. And yet, within a single May afternoon, this iron town becomes the site of the deadliest sudden disaster in the history of the United States up to that day. How does a steel capital of 30,000 people all but vanish in less than 1 hour, on an ordinary Friday, under nothing more than falling rain? The answer begins not with the weather, but with a verdict. For the official story, written by the courts themselves, calls what happens to Johnstown an act of God, a catastrophe that no living person could have foreseen or prevented. That is the story the survivors are handed, and it is the story that stands in law to this day. But the records of that decade tell something the verdict prefers to keep in the shadows. A warning does exist, written and precise, delivered 9 years before the water comes. It names the danger, it names the cause, and it predicts the destruction almost exactly. And the reason it is ignored has nothing to do with God, and everything to do with money, comfort, and the quiet arrogance of men who do not live in the valley below. To understand how a town dies, we must first understand the world that believed it could not. Johnstown in 1889 is a place of remarkable energy. The Cambria Ironworks stretches along the riverbank for more than a mile, and its rolling mills set the pace of every life in the valley. Trains leave loaded with steel and return loaded with people, and the town grows street by street up the narrow floor between the mountains, because the narrow floor is the only ground there is. Churches rise, schools fill, a library opens, and on the last Thursday of May, the whole town turns out for the Memorial Day parade. Veterans marching down Main Street to the cemetery, with children carrying flowers behind them. But beneath this prosperity lies a quiet truth that the people of the valley have long since made peace with. The town is built at the meeting point of two rivers, on a floodplain, at the bottom of a funnel of steep mountain walls. Almost every spring, the rivers rise into the streets, and almost every spring, the town performs the same calm ritual. Goods go up on counters, furniture goes upstairs, children come home from school early, and a day later, the water is gone. Flooding, in Johnstown, is not a catastrophe. It is weather. And a town that has survived 40 years of floods believes, reasonably, that it understands water. What the town does not understand is what has been happening 14 miles up the valley and 450 feet above its rooftops. There, behind an earthen wall 72 feet high and more than 900 feet long, lies a lake 2 miles long and 60 feet deep. The state of Pennsylvania builds the dam between 1838 and 1853 to feed a canal system, and it builds the structure properly, packed earth around a clay core, with 2 separate ways of letting water go. A spillway cut through solid rock carries overflow around the dam automatically, and 5 great cast iron pipes run through its base, controlled by valves from a wooden tower, so that the lake can be deliberately drained whenever it rises too fast. Those pipes are the emergency brake, and as long as they exist, the lake above Johnstown can always be brought down faster than any storm can fill it. Then, piece by piece, over 14 years, every one of those protections is removed. The railroad kills the canal, and the worthless reservoir passes to a private owner who looks at 5 heavy iron pipes serving nothing, and has them dug out and sold for the value of the scrap metal. It is, on paper, simple housekeeping. In practice, from that day forward, there is no way on earth to lower the lake by a single inch. The only way out is over the top. Then the property finds new owners with a very different purpose. In the smoky boom years of the 1880s, the men who own American steel and coal and banking want somewhere clean to spend their summers, and a private club is formed around the lake, roughly 60 members, admission by invitation only. Its roster crowned by the most famous industrialist of the age, Andrew Carnegie. 16 cottages rise along the shore, and a clubhouse with a long veranda faces the water, and sailboats appear on a lake that hangs above a city of 30,000 people. The club rebuilds the aging dam, but no engineer supervises the work. An old breach is filled with earth and rock and brush and straw. The clay core is never restored. The pipes are never replaced. and then 2 improvements are made for the comfort of the members. The crest of the dam is cut down and leveled to carry a carriage road wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass, which strips away the last few feet of safety margin between the top of the spillway and the top of the wall, and the settling fill leaves the very middle of the dam as its lowest point. And because the lake is being stocked with expensive bass brought in by rail, iron screens are fixed across the spillway to keep the fish from escaping. And from that day, the dam's one remaining drain is a grate that catches every branch and log the mountains send down. So the structure now standing over Johnstown has no drain, no margin, and a strainer across its overflow. And someone notices. In 1880, the most powerful man in Johnstown, the head of the ironworks itself, sends his own engineer up the valley to inspect the dam. The inspection is thorough and the report is blunt. The reconstruction is poor, the fill is inadequate, there is no reliable core, there is no means of discharge, and there is danger of the dam breaking. If it breaks, the report warns, the destruction in the valley below will be terrible. The club's reply arrives in writing. The fears are groundless. The dam is safe. An offer to help pay for proper repairs goes nowhere, and within a few years the one man with the standing to force the issue is dead, and the file is closed. And so the warning that could save 2,000 lives is buried, not by ignorance, but by dismissal. And the lake, patient and indifferent, goes on rising and falling above a town that has been given every reason not to fear it. Because for the next 9 years, the dam becomes Johnstown's private joke. Every spring the rivers rise, and every spring somebody shouts that the dam has broken, and every spring it has not. The town is being trained, year after patient year, to ignore the exact alarm that is coming. On the night of Memorial Day, 1889, the rain begins. A storm system crossing from the west stalls over the Allegheny Mountains and simply opens, and between 6 and 10 inches of water fall in 24 hours, one of the heaviest downpours ever recorded in the region. By dawn on Friday, the 31st of May, the streets of Johnstown are under 2 feet of water, then 4, then 7 in the lowest quarters, and the town performs its ritual one more time. Furniture goes upstairs. Children are sent home. Families settle in on their second floors, mildly annoyed, entirely unafraid, and wait for the rivers to drop the way the rivers have always dropped. 14 miles above them, the caretaker of the club walks out into the rain at first light and sees water where water has never been, climbing the inside of the dam at 4 to 6 inches an hour. Through that whole morning, a handful of men fight for the dam with hand tools, and every single thing they try is defeated by a decision made years earlier. They shovel earth onto the crest to raise it, trying to give back the height that was cut away for the carriage road, and the rain washes it off as fast as they pile it on. They cut a relief channel at the far end to bleed the lake off sideways, and strike bedrock a foot down, digging for a purpose the 5 soled pipes would have served in an afternoon. They wade into the spillway with rakes and iron bars to tear the fish screens clear, and find them packed solid with whole trees, the water already pouring over the top of the debris instead of through it. By late morning, there is one move left. A rider goes down the mud road to the nearest village and puts a warning on the telegraph wire, and the warning travels down the valley toward Johnstown, once, then again, then a third time as the day darkens. The messages arrive and are read, and they land on men who have heard this exact cry a dozen times in a dozen springs, in a town already standing calmly in 4 feet of familiar water. No alarm is rung, no evacuation is ordered, and not one family walks to the hillside. At 11:30 in the morning, the lake reaches the top of the dam and begins to pour over, not through the spillway, but across the packed earth itself, at the settled low point in the dead center of the wall. Water crossing an earth dam cuts into its far face and carves a notch, and the notch deepens, and the deepening feeds itself. For nearly 4 hours, the men on the crest watch the dam eat itself beneath their boots, while 14 miles below, a town stacks furniture and waits for the water to drop. At 10 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, the center of the South Fork Dam lets go. There is no explosion. Witnesses say it looks almost gentle, the notch sagging, the middle of the wall folding outward and dissolving, and then 20 million tons of water enter a valley the width of a street, and for the next hour, the flow pouring through that gap rivals the discharge of the Mississippi River. What travels down the Little Connemara is not water. Within seconds, it strips the valley floor to bedrock and becomes a rolling hill of debris 35 to 40 feet high. Trees and boulders and houses and locomotives with the lake driving inside it, throwing mist ahead of itself and sounding, survivors say, like endless thunder. It erases the first village it touches so completely that the ground afterward is bare rock. It slams into a 78-foot stone railway viaduct and stops, piling higher for 7 minutes behind the arch. And then the viaduct bursts and releases everything at once with the stored force of a second dam breaking. In the railroad yards further down, an engine driver hears it coming before he can see it, ties his whistle down, and reverses his locomotive into town with one unbroken scream of steam running ahead of him. People hear that whistle and run for the hills, and some of them live because of it. His locomotive is swallowed behind him. The next town down is taken entirely, more than a quarter of its people killed in moments, and its riverside wireworks is torn open, feeding miles of barbed wire into the flood, so that the wave now carries its own net. At 7 minutes past 4, 57 minutes after the dam fails, the wall reaches Johnstown. It arrives at 40 miles an hour and nearly 40 feet high, strikes the town, rebounds off the mountainside behind it, and strikes the town again from the opposite direction. Brick buildings that survive the first blow fall in the second. A 4-story hotel where a crowd has gathered, trusting in brick, collapses in seconds. Whole streets of houses lift from their foundations and travel upright, families still inside them, until they come apart. And then everything the flood has gathered along 14 miles arrives at the stone bridge. Where the two rivers meet below the town, the railroad has built 7 arches of solid masonry, and the bridge does not break. It becomes a wall. 30 acres of wreckage pile against it, 70 feet high in places, laced through with barbed wire, and inside that mass, pinned but alive, are hundreds of people. In the early evening, oil from ruptured tank cars ignites somewhere deep in the pile, and the wreckage begins to burn. Men work the edges all night with axes and saws and bare hands, and they pull some souls free, but the fire lives in the middle where no one can reach, and it burns for 3 days. Around 80 people who have survived the flood itself die in that fire, within earshot of the men trying to reach them. By the grey morning of the 1st of June, the storm's work is complete, and where a steel town stood the evening before, there is now mud, bare rock, and silence. 2,209 people are dead. 99 entire families are gone, every member, with no one left alive to report them missing. 396 of the dead are children under 10 years old. Schoolrooms and churches become morgues, with the recovered laid out in rows to be walked past and claimed, and 777 of them are never claimed at all. They lie today beneath blank white markers on a hillside above the town. In a plot, the survivors' name simply the unknown. Bodies are found downriver for years, some as far away as Cincinnati, and one is finally identified 17 years later. The survivors of that first morning face a valley with no clean water, no power, and for a full day almost no connection to the outside world at all, because the rail line that is the only real way in has been torn off its bed for 14 miles, and the telegraph wires are down in nearly every direction. What finally gets out is carried across the water by the few who can escape, and the first reports are so extreme that editors refuse to believe them. In the summer heat, the ruins present a danger crueler than the water. A narrow valley filled with standing floodwater, broken sewers, dead animals and unrecovered victims is an epidemic waiting to begin, and everyone directing the recovery knows it. Typhoid does break out in the weeks that follow and claims dozens more lives, and much of the relief effort becomes a war of disinfectant and clean water against the disease, trying to finish what the flood started. And at the stone bridge, the burned mass of wreckage cannot be pulled apart by hand and cannot be left where it stands, because it dams the outlet of 2 rivers. So in the end, it is broken up with dynamite, and the clearance work goes on for months. News of the catastrophe travels as no disaster news has ever traveled before, because this is the first great calamity of the telegraph age, and within hours the entire world knows. More than 100 reporters reach the ruined valley. Relief pours in from every state and from 18 countries, nearly $4 million in the money of the day, from people who could not find the Connemara Valley on a map. And 5 days after the flood, an elderly woman steps off a train with doctors and nurses behind her. Clara Barton, founder of the American Red Cross, makes Johnstown her young organization's first great peacetime operation, stays 5 months, and proves for the first time that a nation can organize mercy on the scale of the disaster itself. Her camp is only part of the answer the country sends. State militia arrive to guard the relief stores and keep order in the ruins. Work crews come by the trainload from Pittsburgh once the line is rebuilt, and commissaries feed tens of thousands of people who own nothing but what they were wearing on Friday afternoon. Prefabricated one-room houses, ordered by the hundred, go up in rows on the cleared ground, so that families can leave the tents before winter. It is improvised, imperfect, and enormous, and it is the first time Americans watch their whole country respond to a single town's catastrophe in something close to real time. The town gives its own answer to the valley. The mills are rolling steel again within weeks, because the mills are the reason there is a town at all, and street by street Johnstown rebuilds itself on the same narrow floor between the same two rivers. But the survivors want more than recovery. They want an answer to a simpler question. Whose lake was that, and whose fault is this? The engineering profession asks the same question, and its answer, when it finally comes, is a gift to the club. Within days of the flood, the American Society of Civil Engineers appoints a committee of 4 of its most eminent members to examine the ruined dam, and they walk the wreckage, survey the gap, and take their measurements. Their report is then held back for 2 full years, and when it appears in 1891, it concedes every change the club made: the sold pipes, the lowered crest, the screened spillway, and then concludes that none of it matters, because in the committee's judgment, the storm was so great that even the original dam would have been overtopped and destroyed. The men who write those words move in the same professional and social circles as the men who own the lake. And for more than a century, that report stands as the scientific verdict on Johnstown. It takes until 2016 for the physics to be checked. Engineers at a Pennsylvania university rebuild the hydraulics of both dams, the one the state designed and the one the club left behind, and their published analysis finds that the original structure had more than twice the discharge capacity of the club's version, and that a dam maintained to the original design would likely never have overtopped at all, and would have ridden out the storm, and would have saved thousands of lives. The 1891 committee, they conclude, expressed a confidence its own evidence could not support. The official science, like the official story, protected the men who owned the water. So the survivors are left with the courts. And so they sue the club, and the record they carry into court is devastating. The written report of 1880, predicting the collapse. The 5 pipes, sold for scrap. The lowered crest. The screens across the spillway. And against all of it, they lose every single case that is brought, and not one survivor ever recovers a dollar. The club has been organized in a way that shields the private fortunes of its members. Its records are conveniently thin, and the law of Pennsylvania in that era demands proof that the owners behaved unreasonably by the standards of their day. The court finds no such proof, and rules the flood an unforeseeable act of God. An engineer foresees it in writing. 9 years early, the owners dismiss it in writing. Both documents exist, and it does not matter. The town itself carries the harder sentence. Johnstown rebuilds on the same narrow floor, because the mills leave it no choice. And the valley floods again, in 1936 so badly that the federal government rebuilds the river channels in concrete, and the town is promised it is finally flood-free. And then again in 1977, when a night of rain overwhelms even those defenses, and 84 more people die. 3 generations, 3 floods, 1 valley that geography never stops aiming at. They go on to endow universities and build libraries and shape the century that follows, and several give generously and anonymously to the relief fund, and none ever admits fault. One of them eventually gives Johnstown a library of its own, and by an irony no one plans. That building today houses the museum where this story is told, so that the memory of the flood is kept inside a gift from a man who owned the lake. Yet the greatest legacy of Johnstown is not the museum, and not the rebuilt town. It is the hard lesson written into American law by its loss. In the decades that follow, the courts move steadily toward a harder rule, the principle of strict liability, which holds that whoever gathers a dangerous thing above other people's heads answers for it when it escapes, whether or not they meant harm, and whether or not they were careful. The verdict of 1889 is never overturned, but the doctrine it exposed as broken is slowly replaced, and law students still study Johnstown as the disaster that showed why the change had to come. Out of 2,000 deaths comes a rule designed to make sure that no court ever again calls a sold-off safety valve the will of God. 1 set of iron pipes, sold as scrap. 1 carriage road, cut into a dam's last margin. 1 screen, bolted across a spillway to save the fish. 1 written warning, answered with the word groundless. A lake rises, a wall folds, and a steel town vanishes in 57 minutes. The official story calls it an act of God, and the official story stands in law to this day. But the truth is that Johnstown is killed by decisions, each one small, each one reasonable to the man who makes it, and every one of them made by people who would never stand beneath the water they were holding back. God sends the rain, men sell the pipes, and between those two facts lies the whole distance between a storm and a catastrophe, because the same rain falling on the dam the state built in 1853 is, in the judgment of the engineers who examined the wreck, a survivable storm. Stand today in the gap where the dam used to be, on the grassed-over shoulders the water left behind, and the scale of the thing is almost impossible to hold in the mind. There is no lake, only a green valley and a small creek, and 14 miles away, a town that keeps a museum, a cemetery with 777 blank stones, and a memory that has outlived everyone who owned the water. And that is why this story feels so strangely modern. Across the United States today stand tens of thousands of dams, and thousands of them are rated high hazard, meaning that failure would take human life. And a great many of those are old and privately owned, and standing above towns whose people rarely think to look up. The average American dam is now well over half a century old, and the engineers who grade them report thousands in poor or unsatisfactory condition. And when one of them fails, at Buffalo Creek in 1972, at Teton in 1976, the inquiries that follow read like echoes of a Pennsylvania valley. The waters are still being held by walls most of us have never inspected, owned by people most of us have never met, and history quietly asks whether we have truly learned what Johnstown paid to teach. Explore with us how other single days reshape the world, and discover the warnings hidden inside them. 11 years after Johnstown, on a low sand island in Texas, another warning goes unheeded, and this time the sea itself comes for a golden city in the night. That story is on your screen now.